Imagine, for a moment, that you are sitting right behind the resolute desk in the Oval Office.
Okay, I am picturing it.
So in your left hand,
Mm-hmm.
you are holding this highly classified battle damage assessment. And it confirms that the United States military has just, functionally eradicated the Navy
Oh.
of a major Middle Eastern adversary.
Wow.
Yes, sinking over 150 warships.
Yeah.
I mean, it is a historic, completely paradigm-shifting military victory.
Right, a legacy-defining moment.
Exactly. But then, in your right hand, you are holding a draft of an official White House press release.
Huh.
And this document, it has absolutely nothing to do with the war.
Nothing at all.
Nothing. It is entirely dedicated to clapping back at a random internet commentator, literally a user whose screen name is the Hairy Pickle.
Oh, man.
And this user, they suggested you were secretly visiting a hospital. So as the person behind the desk, you have the power to command the entire global news cycle. Which one of these documents do you choose to push out to the public?
I mean, it sounds totally absurd when you frame it that way. You would obviously assume the massive geopolitical victory takes absolute precedence, right?
I don't think so.
But as we are going to see today, when you look at the actual output of the executive branch during this highly specific window of time, the answer is somehow both.
Yeah.
And incredibly, they are treated with almost the exact same level of official gravity.
It is an incredibly surreal landscape we are navigating right now. We are zeroing in on a very volatile moment in time, early April 2026.
Right.
And the scenario is this. You, sitting there listening, you are trying to cut through the noise. You want to understand the actual, the real-world impact of this massive flurry of executive actions.
All these official statements and policy guidance memos issued by the White House over just a few days.
Exactly, because it is a towering stack of documents.
It really is. I mean, they cover everything. Massive structural changes to the federal budget, the underlying mechanics of college sports, sweeping declarations about religious liberty, and of course, the border.
So our mission today is to look past the presidential seals. We are going to look right past all those all-caps headlines.
We want to see the machinery.
Yes, we want to analyze what these executive orders and actions actually do mechanically. Because, intent and effect are often two very different things in Washington.
Oh, absolutely.
We want to know who really benefits when the ink actually dries. Is it everyday Americans? Or is it massive, wealthy corporations?
Right. Which of these actions represent genuine structural changes to how the government operates, and which are just highly calibrated political theater?
Or deceptive messaging designed to drive a narrative, right? But before we get into the actual text, we really need to issue a very clear disclaimer for you.
Yes, this is crucial. The source materials we are examining today, they contain some highly charged political rhetoric.
Very intense stuff.
Yeah, they use visceral vocabulary targeting both left-wing and right-wing viewpoints, and they deal with extremely sensitive social and cultural issues.
So it is absolutely vital to state right up front that we are not taking sides here.
Not at all.
We are not endorsing the viewpoints, the policies, or the framing of these original documents. Our job is strictly mechanical.
We are just here to impartially report on the content provided, to break down the machinery of the language and the policy within the text.
Right. We're here to read the blueprints, not to argue about the paint color.
I like that.
Thanks. So to start reading those blueprints, we actually need to start with what is probably the most opaque bureaucratic document in the entire stack.
Because that is usually where the real money moves.
Exactly. The most profound financial impacts on the American economy are usually buried under a mountain of acronyms. So we are looking at new guidance issued by the Council on Environmental Quality, the CEQ.
The CEQ. I mean, the moment you say it, you can just feel the air leave the room.
I know. It sounds like a committee designed to, invent new types of beige paint.
It really does. But this is actually about the National Environmental Policy Act, or NEPA. And this is huge.
Okay, so to understand the stakes here, what is NEPA exactly?
So, enacted back in 1970, NEPA is basically the Magna Carta of environmental law in the United States.
Right.
Its core requirement is that before the federal government can undertake or fund any major action that significantly affects the environment, they have to prepare a detailed statement.
So if they want to build, a massive new interstate highway, or lay a multi-state oil pipeline.
Or erect a new bridge, the government must assess the environmental impact first.
And those statements are notoriously massive, right? Like phone book sized.
Way bigger. They're called environmental impact statements, or EIS. And yes, they can run thousands of pages. They cost millions of dollars to produce.
Just to do the study.
Just for the study. And they take an average of 4 to 5 years to complete.
Wow.
And that is before a single shovel even hits the dirt. So the corporate world has argued for decades that this process essentially paralyzes American infrastructure development.
Okay, so the administration steps in with this new guidance. What are they actually changing mechanically to fix that?
So the CEQ issued guidance instituting what they call a categorical exclusion-first approach.
Categorical exclusion, okay.
Right, and they rolled it out alongside a new digital tool called CE Works. A categorical exclusion, or a CE, is essentially a bureaucratic off-ramp.
How so?
It is a determination that a specific category of actions does not individually or cumulatively have a significant effect on the human environment.
Okay, so if your project qualifies for a CE.
You get to completely skip the years-long environmental impact statement process entirely.
Okay, well, let me make sure I have the mechanics of this right. It is kind of like applying for a mortgage, right?
Right, okay, go with that.
Normally, the bank requires this incredibly invasive, expensive audit of your finances that takes months. You have to prove everything.
Right.
But a categorical exclusion is the bank basically saying, well, you have the same job title as the last guy we approved, so we're just going to waive the audit entirely and hand you the check today.
That is a remarkably accurate way to put it, yeah. And the administration is explicitly saying this new approach is going to, quote, slash costs, unleash growth, and save Americans billions.
Save Americans billions. That is the framing.
Yeah.
But we really have to look at who is actually realizing those savings, right?
Exactly. When the administration claims it is saving Americans billions of dollars, the immediate, tangible financial beneficiaries are not everyday citizens.
Right. I'm not getting a check in the mail because they built a bridge faster.
No, you are not. The direct beneficiaries are massive infrastructure developers, large-scale construction firms, multinational energy companies.
Heady hitters.
Right. They're the ones whose balance sheets are instantly improved, because they no longer have to burn millions of dollars on environmental consultants and legal fees just to navigate the NEPA red tape.
But I want to push back on that a bit, just to play devil's advocate.
Sure.
If a new bridge gets built in 3 years instead of 10, because they skipped that massive EIS process, doesn't the local community benefit from having the bridge faster? I mean, doesn't the everyday American save time on their commute?
They might, yes. And honestly, that is the absolute strongest argument for deregulation. Speed.
Right.
But you have to look at the other side of the ledger. What are you sacrificing for that speed? The document quotes the CEQ chairman claiming they are maintaining practical environmental standards.
Okay.
But if you shift the entire federal bureaucracy to a CE-first mindset, you are fundamentally altering the balance of power.
What do you mean by CE-first mindset?
It means the default directive from the White House to all federal agencies is to actively search for reasons not to conduct an environmental study.
Oh, wow. So they were actively trying to bypass it.
Exactly.
And the whole point of NEPA wasn't just to protect, a specific species of frog. It was to give local communities a mandatory public forum.
Right, a voice.
To say, hey, this pipeline is going to ruin our groundwater, or this highway is going to bulldoze our neighborhood.
Precisely. The EIS process mandates public comment periods. It forces corporate and government interests to actually listen to community objections on the official record.
So by fast-tracking these projects through categorical exclusion,
you are prioritizing speed and corporate cost savings over the dignity of local community input and over thorough environmental caution.
So it is a feature, not a bug, of the policy.
Yes. You cannot streamline a multi-year process into a few weeks without drastically reducing the amount of scrutiny applied. It is impossible.
So the real-world effect here is a massive transfer of time and capital back to large corporations. And it's all quietly executed through a change in how a specific acronym is applied by administrative agencies.
It is brilliant in its quietness. It is a highly technical memo. And that quiet, sterile approach to massive structural change leads us directly to the next document in our stack.
Oh, yes. This next one is genuinely wild, just based on how short it is.
It really is.
We are looking at a presidential memorandum dated April 8th, 2026, and it's titled Order Under Section 251A of the Balanced Budget and Emergency Deficit Control Act.
A very dry title.
Very. And it is literally just a few paragraphs long. You could read it in a minute.
But the financial devastation it triggers is staggering. This document is a sequestration order.
Okay, let's break that down, because sequestration is one of those beltway words that makes people's eyes just completely glaze over.
Oh, absolutely.
But mechanically, how does it actually work?
So in federal budget mechanics, sequestration is basically the nuclear option.
Okay.
Normally, Congress debates the budget, right? They decide to cut 5% from the Department of Education, maybe add 2% to the Department of Defense. They shift some money around in transportation.
It's a granular, negotiated process.
Exactly. People argue, people compromise. Sequestration completely abandons negotiation.
So what does it do?
It is an automatic, blind, across-the-board budget cut.
Okay, I was trying to think of how to conceptualize this, and the best way I can describe it is it's not a scalpel. It is a Roomba with a chainsaw attached to it.
A Roomba with a chainsaw.
Yeah. You just drop it into the federal budget, and it bounces off the walls, blindly cutting the exact same percentage off of a vital rural hospital grant as it cuts from the budget for, like, new office chairs in Washington.
That is a highly accurate, if slightly terrifying analogy.
There is zero human discretion involved once the order is signed.
None. The law states that everything that isn't specifically exempted by statute gets slashed by a predetermined mathematical formula.
So the document says it triggers reductions for fiscal year 2027 in each non-exempt budget account.
Right.
But what is absolutely fascinating to me is what the document does not say. It never tells you who is actually going to get hurt.
And that is the brilliance of the bureaucratic framing. The document is presented purely as an exercise in fiscal responsibility.
Just balancing the checkbook.
Right. The administration is just enforcing the Balanced Budget Act.
Right.
But when you look at the reality of non-exempt federal programs, you are looking at things that directly impact regular, everyday Americans.
Like what kind of programs?
We are talking about block grants that fund local emergency services. We are talking about certain healthcare safety net subsidies, Head Start programs for early childhood education, infrastructure maintenance funds.
So the people who lose out aren't abstract concepts. They aren't just line items. They are families who rely on local programs that are subsidized by federal dollars.
Exactly.
But the president gets to sign this sterile 3-paragraph order pointing to an Office of Management and Budget report. And he keeps his hands entirely clean of the specific cuts.
Yes. When you juxtapose the CEQ environmental memo with this sequestration order, a very clear strategic pattern emerges.
What's the pattern?
The administration executes its most profound, far-reaching material changes to the American economy in absolute silence.
Right.
They deregulate billion-dollar corporate projects and unilaterally slash community funding using the driest, most impenetrable bureaucratic language possible.
Keep the real money moves quiet. I think that is a vital takeaway for you listening. Because when we contrast that silence with what happens when a multi-billion-dollar industry actually wants something from the government.
Oh, the volume goes up to an 11.
It is a night and day difference. We have an executive order from the president here, and the title alone tells you everything you need to know about the framing.
Urgent national action to save college sports.
Exactly. The contrast is just jarring. You have a quiet 3-paragraph memo slashing vital federal programs, and then you have this highly publicized urgent executive order designed to save the business model of college football and basketball.
It is quite a pivot.
So let's look at the source material for this. The president signs this order to establish, quote, clear, consistent, and fair rules on eligibility, transfers, and compensation for student athletes. And the administration's framing is that the beloved American institution of college sports is under threat from legal chaos. And the White House is swooping in to protect the athletes and save the game.
But we have to ask, as analysts, what is the actual mechanical reality of this crisis in college sports? I mean, why do they need saving in the first place?
Right, because for a century, the NCAA had a bulletproof business model.
The best in the world.
They generated billions of dollars in television revenue, merchandise, and ticket sales. And they secured the labor, meaning the athletes, for basically the cost of a scholarship.
It was a massive corporate enterprise built entirely on an unpaid workforce, and it was legally shielded by this concept of amateurism.
But over the last few years leading up to 2026, the judicial branch finally blew that model apart.
They really did.
You're talking about the Supreme Court rulings and the changes that allowed athletes to profit from their name, image, and likeness, or NIL.
Yes, and specifically the massive House v. NCAA antitrust settlement. The courts essentially ruled that the NCAA and its member universities were violating federal antitrust laws.
By doing what?
By illegally colluding to cap athlete compensation. So the free market finally arrived for, a 19-year-old starting quarterback.
And the universities are panicking.
Absolutely. They are now facing billions of dollars in back pay, and they are being forced into a future where they have to actually share revenue with the players.
Okay, so let me play devil's advocate here again.
Go for it.
If the courts just blew up the entire economic foundation of a massive American institution, isn't the president right to step in? I mean, doesn't the executive branch need to establish new rules so the whole sport doesn't just financially collapse into chaos?
Well, that is the exact argument the universities are making, but you have to look at the limits of executive power. The president cannot overturn a judicial antitrust ruling with an executive order. No, he cannot magically grant the NCAA an antitrust exemption. Only Congress has the power to pass legislation that grants an industry immunity from antitrust laws.
Which brings us to the most revealing part of this document stack. The White House provided pages and pages of effusive, over-the-top praise for this executive order.
So much praise.
But look at who is doing the praising. It isn't the college point guards or the gymnasts.
No, it is the management class.
Right.
It is Charlie Baker, the NCAA president. It's Greg Sankey, the commissioner of the SEC. It is highly paid, multi-millionaire head coaches like Nick Saban and John Calipari.
And when you read their quotes, almost every single one of them does the exact same pivot.
It's so transparent.
They thank the president for his leadership, and then in the very next breath, they beg Congress to pass a piece of legislation called the SCORE Act.
That is the tell right there. The executive order itself is legally toothless. It is incredibly vague.
It uses phrases like support enforcement and promoting sustainable revenue sharing.
Right. It doesn't actually enact binding rules because it legally can't.
So what is the point of the executive order then, if it doesn't do anything?
It is a highly coordinated public relations campaign. The universities know they need a federal bailout.
They need Congress.
Yes. They need Congress to pass the SCORE Act to set a national standard, limit their legal liabilities, and legally protect their revenue models from further lawsuits by the athletes.
So the executive order is just a shiny object.
Exactly. It is political theater designed to mobilize the public. The public loves college sports, right? So this pressures their congressional representatives to pass what is essentially a corporate bailout.
That is fascinating. The executive order isn't the policy at all. The executive order is the television commercial for the policy.
Very expensive commercial.
And it is entirely deceptive in its framing. It uses the language of protecting the athletes to mask a massive lobbying effort designed to protect the wealth of the universities and the NCAA executives.
It is the complete weaponization of protective language to serve an institutional agenda. And that concept, using highly emotive, values-based language to package structural overhauls, that is a perfect bridge to the next area of our analysis.
Yes, because if you want to see the absolute masterclass in using values-based language to reshape American society, we have to look at the administration's Easter messaging.
We do. We have a White House press release dated April 5, 2026. The title is, "This Easter, President Trump reaffirms America as a beacon for Christian liberty."
Now, as you mentioned in our disclaimer earlier, this document is a minefield of highly charged cultural and political issues.
Very much so.
The document lists numerous actions the administration has taken, framing all of them under the umbrella of defending the Christian faith. And the sheer scope of the policies listed here is massive.
It touches everything. They announced the establishment of a White House faith office. They tout the banning of federal funding for what they call the chemical and surgical mutilation of minors.
Right.
They announced the end of the National Institutes of Health, using fetal tissue from aborted babies for medical research. They highlight the elimination of abortion insurance mandates and the creation of a national school choice program.
So let's evaluate the actual mechanical effect of these policies on everyday Americans. Because the document frames this as a massive victory for religious liberty. And for conservative Christians, this is exactly what they voted for.
Right. It is the realization of decades of policy goals regarding moral governance.
But if we look at the mechanics, what is the effect?
The effect of these actions is the systematic structural restriction of access to specific types of healthcare.
Okay.
By banning federal funding for gender-affirming care, by ending fetal tissue research, which, by the way, is critical for various immunological and neurological medical advancements, and by eliminating abortion coverage mandates, the administration is tangibly reducing medical options and funding streams across the country.
And let's look at the education piece, too. Because the National School Choice Program is consistently framed by its proponents as empowering parents and rescuing kids from failing schools.
That is always the pitch.
But what is the actual mechanism at play there? Where does the money go?
Mechanically, school choice programs take public tax dollars that would have gone to secular, state-run public school districts and redirect them into vouchers or educational savings accounts that parents can use to pay private school tuition.
Okay.
But because the vast majority of private schools in the United States are religious or faith-based, the mechanical reality of this policy is the massive redirection of public funds into religious institutions.
So public tax dollars are directly funding faith-based education on a national scale.
Yes.
But the way the White House communicates these changes is anything but mechanical. I mean, the vocabulary in this document is incredibly intense.
It is designed to be visceral. It is designed to provoke a reaction.
I am looking at the exact text right now. It refers to gender-affirming care as barbaric. It uses the word mutilation. It talks about the systematic discrimination against Christians by the previous administration.
It doesn't hold back.
It even highlights the Justice Department arresting, quote, radical left rioters.
This is intentional political framing. The language is crafted to elicit disgust, moral outrage, and a profound sense of in-group solidarity.
Us versus them.
Exactly. While the document pays a very brief lip service to establishing a commission to safeguard religious freedom for all faiths, the overwhelming thrust of the text explicitly uses the power of the federal government to prioritize and enforce one specific religious viewpoint.
In federal domestic policy.
Yes, and even in foreign aid.
Right. They specifically mentioned expanding the Mexico City policy. For those who don't know, how does that work mechanically?
So the Mexico City policy, which critics often refer to as the global gag rule, ensures that American taxpayer dollars allocated for global health assistance do not go to foreign non-governmental organizations that perform or even promote abortion as a method of family planning.
Yeah.
The administration also highlights that they pulled out of the World Health Organization over abortion policies. They are utilizing the immense leverage of American global financing to enforce a specific moral framework internationally.
But here's where my alarms really started going off when reading this document. There are claims in here that seem, well, wildly unconstitutional.
Oh, definitely.
For instance, there's a bullet point that says the president declared it the, quote, official policy of the U.S. government that there are only two immutable sexes, male and female. Can a president just declare biological definitions via executive fiat like that?
Well, he can declare whatever he wants in a press release. But legally, that declaration crashes headlong into massive bodies of existing law, most notably Title IX, which protects against sex-based discrimination in education, and various civil rights employment laws. You cannot rewrite decades of civil rights jurisprudence with a memo.
Right. And there's another point where it says he ordered the repeal of all regulations conflicting with Supreme Court precedents on religious liberty. It just sounds so simple when you write it in a bullet point. Just poof, repealed.
It is a massive constitutional flag. The president does not have a magic wand to simply wipe away thousands of pages of federal administrative law by broadly stating it conflicts with the Supreme Court.
So how does that actually work?
The repeal of federal regulations is governed by the Administrative Procedure Act, or the APA.
Okay, what does the APA require?
It requires a very rigorous process. If an agency wants to appeal a rule, they have to publish a notice of proposed rulemaking.
They have to tell the public.
Right. Then they have to open a public comment period, which can generate hundreds of thousands of responses from citizens and experts.
Which takes time.
A lot of time. The agency then has to formally address those comments and legally prove that their decision to repeal the rule is not, quote, arbitrary and capricious.
Arbitrary and capricious, so they have to have a legally sound reason.
Exactly. It is an incredibly complex, legally perilous process that takes years.
So if the president knows he can't actually do this legally with a single memo, why put it in the press release? What is the play here?
Because the legal reality is entirely secondary to the political messaging. These are highly aggressive, performative uses of executive power.
Performative?
Yes. They cross the line from standard administrative governance into culture war legal battles. The administration knows full well these orders will face immediate, immense judicial scrutiny.
They'll be sued instantly.
Instantly. And they will likely be struck down or tied up in courts for years. But the press release serves its purpose today. It signals to the base, hey, we are fighting for your moral worldview against the institutions.
So the fight itself is the deliverable.
Exactly. The fight is the point.
And that concept, weaponizing language to define an in-group and an out-group, and prioritizing the fight over the actual mechanics, that leads us directly to the administration's actions on the border.
It really does.
Because if you want to see the absolute ultimate application of visceral, emotionally charged language to drive a policy narrative, immigration is the epicenter.
We have two contrasting sources regarding immigration in this stack, and they perfectly illustrate the administration's dual strategy.
Which is?
Executing quiet, devastating bureaucratic effectiveness while providing loud, sensational public relations as cover.
Okay, let's start with the bureaucratic effectiveness side. We have a press release titled, "Era of Amnesty is Over. President Trump restores rule of law to immigration courts." And the raw data they are presenting here is staggering.
The numbers are huge. The document boasts that the administration has replaced what they call activist judges, and they have driven the asylum grant rate down to a historic low of just 7%.
7%, that is incredibly low.
For context, that rate plummeted from over 50% under the previous administration. They also note that immigration courts issued nearly 500,000 removal orders in fiscal year 2025.
Wow.
Which they claim is a 57% increase over the prior year.
I really want to dig into the how of this, because dropping an asylum grant rate from 50% to 7% across an entire nation, that isn't just a policy tweak.
No, it's a structural collapse.
Right. So how does the executive branch actually achieve that mechanically?
This is a crucial point of civic understanding that most people miss. Immigration courts in the United States are not part of the judicial branch.
Wait, they aren't?
No. They are not independent federal courts. They are housed entirely under the Department of Justice, which means they are part of the executive branch.
Oh, I see.
So the judges are essentially employees of the Attorney General.
Wait, so the Attorney General can just fire judges who grant too much asylum?
Yes. The President and the Attorney General have immense power over this system. They can hire hardliner judges and reassign or dismiss judges they deem too lenient.
That is wild.
Furthermore, the Attorney General possesses a unique power called certification.
What does that do?
They can take an immigration case from the appeals board, decide it themselves, and issue a ruling that instantly becomes binding precedent for every single immigration judge in the country.
Oh, wow. So they can unilaterally change the criteria for what constitutes valid asylum.
Exactly. By using certification to severely restrict the definitions of things like domestic violence or gang violence as valid grounds for asylum, and by imposing strict case quotas on judges to speed up deportations, you create a systemic, mechanical denial of entry.
So the true impact on regular people, both the immigrants fleeing violence and the American communities trying to absorb them, is a massive systemic shutdown of the entire asylum process.
Right. It is a highly effective sweeping bureaucratic lever being pulled.
But again, look at how dry that is to explain. To the mechanics of the DOJ's Executive Office for Immigration Review, that does not make the evening news.
No, it doesn't.
The administration knows that statistics don't go viral, so to capture the public's attention, they use a different document.
Right. And this brings us to the second press release. It is titled, "Democrats Empower Sick, Criminal, Illegal Alien Predators to Prey on American Women, Children."
And I have to be honest, reading this document was genuinely difficult.
It is brutal.
It is essentially a catalog of nightmares.
It is a detailed list of graphic, horrific crimes committed by undocumented immigrants. It lists rapes, murders, and torture. It names the victims, it names the perpetrators, it details the brutality of the acts.
It is relentlessly graphic. It uses phrases like depraved illegal alien killers, violent sexual predators, and sick monsters. It describes a toddler beaten to death and a victim who had his fingernails ripped off in a home invasion.
As analysts, we have to hold two truths simultaneously here. First, these crimes are genuine, profound tragedies. Real people lost their lives in horrific ways.
Absolutely.
But second, we must highlight the deeply deceptive wording and the underlying political tactic at play in how the White House presents this information.
What is the deception exactly?
The deception lies in the framing of intentionality. The document explicitly frames these isolated, horrific crimes as the direct and deadly result of radical left policies.
Right.
It claims Democrats are actively shielding these monsters and turning jurisdictions into amnesty factories.
So it implies that political opponents actively want these crimes to happen, that they are doing it on purpose.
It is a classic, albeit extreme, political tactic. You take the worst, most statistically anomalous acts of violence committed within a population of millions of people,
And you amplify them.
and you use those anomalies to paint the entire demographic and your political opposition with the brush of extreme, deliberate violence. The language is masterfully crafted to bypass logic and directly incite fear and anger.
It's pure emotional manipulation. You read that list of crimes, and you aren't thinking about the 7% asylum rate or DOJ court structure. You were just terrified and angry.
And that is the point. Look at what the sensationalism distracts from. While the public and the media are completely consumed by arguments over this horrific list of crimes and the inflammatory rhetoric, the administration has quietly restructured the entire architecture of the immigration system.
To deny 93% of all asylum seekers.
Regardless of their background, their merit, or their validity. The loud, visceral sensationalism provides the perfect cover for the quiet, sweeping policy changes.
Fear is the ultimate smokescreen.
Here precisely. Now, we are going to pivot sharply away from these highly charged social and cultural issues and look at a purely economic document in the stack.
Yes, we are moving from the visceral to the mathematical. And this is fascinating because it gives us a really clear window into how the administration evaluates consumer benefits versus the interests of massive traditional financial institutions when a new technology disrupts the market.
We are looking at a research report issued by the Council of Economic Advisors, the CEA, dated April 8, 2026. It is titled Effects of Stablecoin Yield Prohibition on Bank Lending.
Okay, this dives deep into the weeds of digital finance and cryptocurrency. But the core question at the heart of this report is incredibly relatable to everyone listening.
Which is?
Who gets to keep the interest earned on your money?
Exactly. To understand the stakes, we need to understand what a stablecoin actually is and why it threatens traditional banking.
Okay, let me try to conceptualize this because crypto can be incredibly dense. So a stablecoin is essentially a digital token that is pegged one-to-one to the US dollar, right?
Correct. It is designed to hold its value, unlike Bitcoin, which fluctuates wildly.
But why would anyone want a digital dollar that just sits there? Oh, wait. Are they treating it like a casino chip?
That is an excellent way to look at it. Build that analogy out.
Okay, let's say you take a real physical US dollar to a digital casino. You hand them the dollar, and they give you a digital casino chip that is permanently pegged to that dollar. That digital chip is your stablecoin. You can walk around the internet holding that chip, trading it, sending it to people. But the casino didn't just burn your real dollar. They took your physical dollar and they put it in a safe, interest-bearing account, like a short-term U.S. Treasury bill.
Exactly. And right now, Treasury bills are paying significant interest, so that dollar is generating free money.
The big question is, who gets that free money? Who gets the interest? Does the casino just keep it all as profit, or do they pass a percentage of that interest back to you, the consumer, who is actually holding the digital chip?
In the crypto world, passing that interest back to the consumer is called offering yield. And this CEA document evaluates a piece of legislation called the Genius Act of 2025.
Okay, what does the Genius Act do?
It regulates stablecoins. It forces the issuers, the casino in your analogy, to hold one-to-one reserves, meaning they have to keep your real dollar safe and liquid.
Which makes sense.
But crucially, it strictly prohibits them from offering any form of interest or yield to the people holding the stablecoins.
Wait, the law says the casino must keep all the interest. The consumer is legally prohibited from getting a cut.
Yes.
Why on earth would Congress pass a law stopping everyday consumers from making money on their own assets?
To understand why, you have to look at the traditional banking model. Traditional banks operate on fractional reserve banking. When you deposit $1 in your checking account, the bank doesn't keep it in a vault.
Right, they lend it out.
They lend 90 cents of it out for mortgages, auto loans, and business loans. That lending is the engine of the economy. The traditional banking lobby argued heavily for the Genius Act.
Okay.
Their rationale was that if stablecoins are allowed to offer competitive interest rates, say 4 or 5%, regular people will take their money out of traditional checking and savings accounts and put it into stablecoins.
Because traditional banks pay practically nothing. Think about the savings account you have right now at a legacy bank. You're probably making 0.01% interest.
Exactly. The banks were terrified they would lose all their deposits to crypto competitors offering better rates.
And the banks claim that if they lose those deposits, they will have to drastically reduce the amount of money they lend out, which would choke the broader economy.
Right. So the Genius Act was framed to the public as a necessary measure to protect the broader American economy by protecting bank lending.
It's essentially the government legally mandating that crypto competitors aren't allowed to offer you a better deal than your legacy bank.
Yes.
But this CEA report actually does the math on the banking lobby's claim. And the math is genuinely shocking.
It completely eviscerates the banking lobby's entire argument. The Council of Economic Advisors built a baseline economic model to analyze the effect of eliminating stablecoin yield.
And what do they find?
They found that prohibiting yield only increases traditional bank lending by $2.1 billion.
Which sounds like a lot of money to you and me, but in the context of the multi-trillion-dollar U.S. credit market.
It is a statistical rounding error. It represents a minuscule 0.02% increase in total bank lending. But the cost to consumers, the interest that everyday people are legally prevented from earning on their stablecoins, is $800 million.
That is a terrible trade. To protect a tiny fraction of a single % of bank lending, the government is deliberately costing everyday crypto consumers $800 million.
It is a massive government-mandated transfer of potential wealth away from consumers directly toward the protection of traditional financial institutions.
Incredible.
And the CEA report goes even further to dismantle the rhetoric used to pass the law. They specifically address the community bank argument.
Oh, right. Whenever politicians are defending banking regulations or bailouts, they never talk about Wall Street. They always talk about protecting the mom-and-pop community banks on Main Street.
It is the most reliable political shield in Washington. But the CEA's data shows that 76% of the benefit from this yield prohibition goes directly to the massive, systematically important large banks.
So not the mom-and-pop shops.
Not at all. The local community banks barely see a benefit. Even in a scenario where the CEA stacked every worst-case, highly implausible assumption into their model, assuming the stablecoin market grows to 6 times its current size, and the Federal Reserve drastically changes its monetary framework.
Even then.
Even then, community bank lending only goes up by 6.7%.
So this law actively hurts regular Americans who hold these digital assets solely to provide a negligible, largely symbolic layer of protection to the massive banking lobby.
It is a textbook example of regulatory capture. The policy mechanics heavily favor the incumbent institutions at the direct expense of the consumer, despite all the lofty rhetoric about protecting the economy.
It is another instance of looking past the stated intent to find the mechanical reality.
Exactly.
It is brilliant to have the hard math lay it bare like that. Okay, we have covered environmental deregulation, blunt force budget cuts, the theater of college sports, sweeping religious overhauls, the weaponization of border statistics, and the mechanics of crypto regulation.
We have covered a lot of ground.
We have. For our final section, we are zooming all the way out. We want to look at how this administration projects global power and, crucially, how it manages its own media narratives simultaneously.
The juxtaposition in this final batch of documents is perhaps the most revealing part of our entire analysis. We are looking at a masterclass in a split-screen presidency.
Let's look at the global stage first. We have a fact sheet from April 9th, 2026. It details Vice President J.D. Vance's trip to Budapest, Hungary. It's titled, Advancing the United States-Hungary Bilateral Partnership.
From a traditional mechanical foreign policy perspective, this is a highly effective use of the executive branch to benefit American industry.
How so?
The administration is acting as the ultimate salesman for American corporations. The vice president secured a commitment from Hungary to purchase $500 million worth of American crude oil.
That's significant.
More importantly, they are advancing a feasibility study that paves the way for Hungary to buy up to $20 billion worth of U.S. small modular reactors, or SMRs.
SMRs. Our next-generation nuclear technology. So this is a massive potential win for American energy and tech companies. The document specifically names GE Vernova, Westinghouse, and Microsoft as partners.
Right.
They also announced that Hungary is buying $700 million worth of U.S. HIMARS rocket systems.
Exactly. It achieves multiple strategic goals simultaneously. It projects American leadership, it helps secure energy dominance in Europe by weaning allies off of Russian energy, and it supports the U.S. defense industrial base. It is serious, substantive geopolitical work.
And on top of that, we have another release from the exact same time frame, where the president calls the crew of the Artemis II mission via satellite.
Yeah.
The astronauts are the first humans to return to the lunar vicinity in over half a century. They're literally orbiting the far side of the moon while talking to the Oval Office.
It's an incredible image.
The president is congratulating them, asking them about their observations, praising American innovation.
It is the traditional, almost comforting role of the commander-in-chief acting as the symbolic leader of American achievement. It projects stability, vision, and national pride.
But then we get to the Middle East. And this is where the split screen becomes absolutely undeniably surreal.
It really does.
They have a press release titled, "Peace Through Strength. Operation Epic Fury crushes Iranian threat as ceasefire takes hold."
We need to outline the sheer military reality presented in this document first, because the scale is historic. Operation Epic Fury is described as a 38-day major combat operation against Iran.
The numbers they claim here are mind-boggling. It claims the U.S. military flew over 10,200 sorties. They struck over 13,000 individual targets.
Huge numbers.
They claim to have completely obliterated the Iranian Navy, sinking 150 warships across 16 different classes and destroying every single submarine in their fleet.
Total devastation.
They say the Iranian Air Force is functionally neutered, with operational flights dropping from 100 a day to 0. They claim to have destroyed 85% of Iran's defense industrial base.
Militarily, if these battle damage assessments hold true, it represents the complete functional neutering of a major regional power.
Yeah.
It is a massive geopolitical victory that forced a ceasefire and secured the reopening of the Strait of Hormuz. It is the exact kind of legacy-defining military triumph that presidential administrations dream of.
Right.
In any normal era, you would expect the White House to focus every single ounce of its communication apparatus on this victory. It would be the only thing they talk about for months.
But they don't. Because concurrently with the announcement of this massive, historic military victory, the White House releases another memo.
This is the crazy part.
This one is on official White House letterhead. The title is, "While President Trump directed heroic rescue, the radical left spread deranged lies."
This document is the ultimate distillation of political theater, completely overshadowing substantive policy.
I am still bewildered by this document. The administration literally took screenshots of random social media posts from everyday users and published them in an official White House memo.
They call it the Wall of Shame.
While the U.S. military is sinking 150 warships and flying 10,000 sorties, the communications team at the White House is aggregating tweets from people who were wildly speculating that the president was secretly at Walter Reed Hospital during the operation simply because his press team called a lid on media access.
Let's analyze the mechanics of this communication choice, because it is deeply revealing. The White House possesses the most powerful megaphone in the history of the world.
Absolutely.
They have the power to command the global narrative. They just won a massive war, yet they actively choose to take that megaphone and elevate absolute internet gossip to the level of a national press release.
They include tweets from accounts with names like the Harry Pickle and Joe from Church.
Yes.
Why? I just don't understand the strategic value. Why give these completely random internet commentators the dignity and the amplification of an official White House response?
Because it reveals the defining, animating characteristic of this administration's communication style.
Grievance.
They cannot let a perceived slight, no matter how small or irrelevant, go unanswered. Even in the midst of asserting absolute global military supremacy, the domestic political narrative, the compulsive need to portray the media and the political left as deranged and sick, takes absolute precedence over statesmanship.
It turns a moment of profound, frankly, terrifying military strength into a petty domestic squabble.
It really does.
It's almost as if the administration is more comfortable fighting culture wars in the comment sections of the internet than taking a victory lap for a real kinetic war.
It is the ultimate political theater. They are taking the highest, most solemn office in the land and actively using its official channels to engage in the kind of online flame wars you see on a message board.
Yeah.
It diminishes the gravity of the office, absolutely, but it is highly effective at feeding the narrative of perpetual persecution that animates their political base.
It's a remarkable synthesis of how modern governance works. When we pull all these disparate threads together, from the quiet environmental deregulation to the blunt force budget cuts, from the PR campaign for college sports to the structural religious overhauls, from the weaponization of border crime to the technical math of stablecoins, all the way to arguing with the Harry Pickle during a war, a very clear, very stark pattern emerges.
So what is your main takeaway as we look at the whole stack?
My takeaway is that to understand modern policy, you have to relentlessly watch what the hands are doing while the mouth is moving.
Well said.
The real structural impacts on everyday Americans are happening quietly. They're happening in dense, impenetrable CEQ memos that rewrite the rules to save massive corporations billions.
Right.
They're happening in obscure sequestration orders that blindly slash funding for community programs. They're happening in the administrative reshuffling of DOJ immigration courts that quietly drop asylum rates to 7%.
Those are the actual mechanics of governance. That is where the power moves.
Right. But the documents that are designed to be allowed, the executive orders pretending to save college athletes, the graphic press releases about violent crimes, the Easter messages about religious liberty, and the bizarre aggregation of social media grievances.
Those are largely symbolic.
Yes, they are political theater designed to steer the narrative, elicit emotional reactions, and act as lobbying tools for entirely different corporate or cultural agendas.
It is a deliberate strategy of distraction by sensation. And it brings up a crucial final thought for you, the listener, to ponder.
What's that?
When we look at this entire ecosystem of information, a really troubling question arises. If a government spends its loudest capital, its official press releases, its most visceral vocabulary, its highest profile executive orders on symbolic fights, unconstitutional signaling, and internet rumors, while simultaneously making its most profound financial, environmental, and legal changes in quiet, sterile, bureaucratic memos, what does that say about where they believe the public's attention span truly lies? Are we being governed by policy, or are we simply being managed by the press release?
That is a haunting question, and it is something you all need to mull over the very next time a breaking news alert pops up on your phone and demands your outrage.
The machinery is always running quietly in the background, whether we're listening to it or not.
Keep reading the fine print.